Hartwell Salvage, Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. A Wednesday morning in October, the kind that smells of low tide and coming rain. Petra Sinclair crossed the gravel lot in a charcoal blazer and low heels, her assistant 2 steps behind with a clipboard. The yard was loud with the groan of a hydraulic press somewhere past the main shed. A man in coveralls was crouched beside a flatbed, checking a chain by running his thumb along each link. She stopped 3 feet from him. "Mr. Hartwell." She did not phrase it as a question. "I'm here to tell you, in person rather than by letter, Sinclair Development will not be proceeding with the partnership offer." The man stood. He was taller than she had expected from the file. He pulled a rag from his back pocket and wiped the grease from his thumb. He did not speak. "The liability profile of this property is outside what our insurers will support," she said. "I'm sure you understand." He folded the rag in half. He looked at her once without heat. "Thank you for coming out." That was all. He tucked the rag back in his pocket and returned to the chain. Petra Sinclair turned and walked back across the gravel. Her assistant caught up and said something about the next meeting. She did not hear it. At the gate, a black SUV with government plates had pulled in from the highway and stopped. She passed it without looking at the driver. The driver did not move. "Not yet. Drop your city in the comments. Like the video if you want to stay until the last scene. You will not regret it." The yard cleared out by 4:30. The press went quiet. The 2 yard workers drove out in a rusted pickup with a Nova Scotia tartan bumper sticker that had been there longer than either of them. Gil Hartwell stayed to finish the load manifest the way he finished it every Wednesday. On paper with a pencil, the way his father had taught him in this same yard. He marked each entry with a small check. He did not rush. The words Petra Sinclair had left behind were still sitting on the gravel where she had put them. He had walked over them twice, and they had not slowed him down or made him feel anything he had not already known how to carry. At 5 o'clock, he locked the main gate and drove the truck 15 minutes north to Mahone Bay Elementary. He pulled up to the curb with 2 minutes to spare. The bell rang and the doors opened and his daughter came out with her backpack half open and a piece of blue sea glass in her fist. She climbed into the cab and buckled herself in. "Mr. Arsenault let us look at a lobster trap today. A real one. Did you learn anything useful? It only works one way." She examined the sea glass against the window. "Daddy, what's liability?" He glanced at her. "Why? There was a lady at the gate when we drove past this morning. She said something about liability. It means Fern blames another person for something going wrong." Fern turned the glass in her fingers. "That doesn't sound fair." "It isn't always." They stopped at the yard for 10 minutes so he could sign a delivery receipt. Fern wandered along the fence line and found a large bolt in the dry grass. She put it in her pocket. She did not see the business card on the doorstep of the office. Gil saw it. He bent down, picked it up without reading it, and put it in his shirt pocket. At home in the house his father had built on the edge of the inlet, he reheated a fish chowder his neighbor Dot had left on Monday. Dot was 73 and had worked at the Lunenburg cannery for 22 years before it closed. She came to dinner every Wednesday because she believed a girl Fern's age needed a second adult at the table. She was already in the kitchen when they got home, setting out 3 bowls without asking. "How was the day?" Dot said. "Went." She ladled the chowder. "Who was the woman in the nice blazer?" "Developer from Halifax." "What did she want?" "To tell me no." Dot spooned into her bowl. She did not push. She had known Gil since he was born, which meant she had learned the shape of his silences a long time ago. "People say no to things they don't understand," she said. "That's not about you." Gil did not answer. He cut a piece of bread for Fern and set it on her bowl. Fern told Dot about the lobster trap. Dot asked good questions. After dinner, Fern brushed her teeth and asked for the chapter book about the lighthouse keeper. Gil read her 3 pages. She was asleep before the 4th. He stood in the doorway looking at her. In the half-dark, the piece of sea glass on the nightstand beside a smooth piece of driftwood she had carried up from the shore last spring. When he came back to the kitchen, Dot was already in her coat. They did not say goodnight. She tapped the counter once on her way out, an old habit from the years she had watched over this house. He listened to her walk down the gravel path. He washed the 2 remaining bowls. He turned off the porch light. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded and listened to the sound of the inlet, the creak of the dock, the low sound of water moving under the pilings, the slow breath of his daughter in the next room. He set the card on the table. Sinclair Development. Petra Sinclair, Chief Executive Officer. He turned it face down and went to bed. Petra Sinclair drove the coast highway back to Lunenburg at 8:40 the next morning with a folder on the passenger seat. Her father had told her once that if you make a decision that affects someone's livelihood, you look them in the eye when you deliver it. She had done that. She had delivered the audit in person, and she had said what needed to be said. She had not slept. She turned in through the open gate of Heartfelt Salvage and parked beside his truck. He was at the north end of the lot, sorting pleat steel by grade, stacking sections with the care of someone who had done it 10,000 times and had never stopped paying attention. He looked up when her door closed. He did not greet her. He set down the section he was holding and waited. She crossed the gravel with the folder in her hand. "Mr. Hartwell, I came to deliver the formal documentation. I wanted you to have it before the week was out." He took the folder. He did not open it. He laid it flat on the hood of his truck, appreciated. She had expected something else. She did not know what, some version of resentment, or argument, or the particular bitterness of a man who had been told no by someone younger than him. She had not expected the calm of someone who had been receiving harder news than this for longer than she had been running a company. At 9:15, the government SUV from the day before turned in from the highway. It stopped on the gravel. A man in a dark suit climbed out from the passenger side. The driver stayed behind the wheel. The man in the suit was Colonel Armand Desjardins, retired, Federal Infrastructure Security, the kind of man whose face appeared occasionally on the back pages of industry journals under the heading Appointed or Awarded. He crossed the yard at a measured pace. He did not look at Petra. He stopped directly in front of Gil Hartwell. "Captain Hartwell," he extended his hand. "It has been a long time." The yard was not quiet. The press was running in the back shed. A herring gull called from the roof of the way station. The government SUV ticked and settled on the gravel. Gil pulled off his work gloves one finger at a time. He shook Desjardins' hand. He did not say sir. He stood the way a man stands when he has not had to stand at attention for several years and no longer needs to. Petra had not moved. The word captain was sitting in the air above the gravel and she did not yet know what to do with it. Desjardins spoke clearly, not loudly, the way men speak when they are accustomed to being heard in difficult conditions. "I'm here on behalf of Infrastructure Canada. The federal government is assembling a civilian advisory team for the Canso Causeway Deep Structure Assessment. The assessment requires partners with demolition engineering clearance and coastal salvage certification. You're one of 4 operations east of Montreal that hold both. I came to ask you personally." Jill listened without moving. Desjardins turned then for the first time and looked at Petra Sinclair. "Miss Sinclair, in March of 2017 there was a structural failure on the Mackay Bridge approach in Halifax during a winter storm assessment. A federal inspection team was caught in the collapse of a secondary span. Your brother was on that team." He paused. Captain Hartwell was the engineer who held the secondary structure in place long enough to get 4 people out. He was not supposed to be in that section. He went in anyway. Petra did not speak. Behind her eyes, the words from yesterday played again in her own voice. "The liability profile of this property is outside what our insurers will support." Gil turned back to Desjardins. "Colonel, I appreciate the visit. I'm not coming back into consulting." Desjardins nodded. He did not argue. He reached into his jacket and took out a card and placed it on the hood of Gil's truck beside the folder Petra had set there minutes before. "The door stays open," he said. He turned and walked back toward the SUV. The driver was already out and waiting. Before he closed the door, the driver stopped beside Petra. He was younger than Desjardins, mid-30s, with the particular posture of someone who had learned it early and never lost it. He spoke low. "Ma'am, what he carries he doesn't put on anyone else. Don't ask him about his wife." The door closed. The SUV rolled out of the yard and turned south onto the highway. Petra stood on the gravel and did not move. The wind off Mahone Bay brought salt and the smell of low-water seaweed. She had not known he was a captain. She had not known about the bridge. She had not known he had a wife. Across the yard, Gil put his gloves back on and returned to the plate steel. He did not look at her. He did not look at the card on the hood. He sorted because sorting was what he did at 9:15 on a Thursday in October. At 10:30, she called her brother from the parking lot of the gas station at the highway junction. She could not trust her voice inside a building. "Tell me about the Mackay Bridge." Liam Sinclair was quiet for a long moment. Then he began. It was March of 2017. The inspection crew had moved onto a secondary span to assess frost heaving in the concrete supports. The railing on the approach gave way. They were below the main deck on the temporary platform. The whole section began to shift. There was no time to get back to the ladder. The platform should have gone. It would have gone, but there was a man in the inspection zone who was not supposed to be there, who had gone in on his own to assess a discrepancy in the original engineering report. He found a tension point and held it manually, with a brace and his own weight, for 11 minutes while the crew got out. Liam had been the last one up the ladder. He never filed a report claiming it, Liam said. He just walked back to his truck and left. I found out his name 2 weeks later through someone at Transport Canada. Petra, I am alive because of him. You owe him more than an audit denial. You owe him a conversation. In person. With your eyes level. She drove to the hardware store on Lincoln Street. She did not know what she was looking for until she was standing at the far end of the third aisle, looking at a small display of locally made woodworking tools. There was a set of hand-finished carving chisels from a craftsman in Bridgewater, each one in a cloth roll. She did not know if he carved. She bought them because the craftsmanship was honest and because she did not know what else to bring to a man who did not appear to need anything. At 2 in the afternoon, she returned to Heartfelt Salvage. She did not call ahead. She walked across the gravel with the cloth roll in her hand and set it on the hood of his truck. My brother told me about the bridge. Gil looked at the cloth roll. He picked it up. He unrolled the top portion and looked at the first chisel. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set the roll down carefully and took 2 mugs from the office shelf. He poured coffee from a camp pot on the small stove by the window and held one out to her. They sat on the step outside the office. The afternoon was cold the way Nova Scotia afternoons in October are cold, present, and unhurried. They drank the coffee. Dot came past on her way back from the way station and slowed when she saw Petra on the step. She did not say anything. She nodded once. It was a nod that meant she had registered something. Fern came out of the office in rubber boots with a moon snail shell cradled in both palms. She crouched beside Petra and held it out. You can hear the bay if you put it to your ear. Petra held the shell to her ear. She listened. She did not perform a reaction. The sound was real and she heard it. Are you the lady from the gate? I am. Daddy didn't say anything about you. He doesn't usually. Fern took the shell back and examined it. He mostly says if something was a good day or if it went. She looked up. Did it go? Petra looked at Gil. He was looking at the ground. I think today was a good day, Petra said. Fern accepted this and went back inside. That evening, after Petra had driven back to the house she was renting on the South Shore for the week, her phone rang. An unknown number with a Dartmouth area code. She answered. The voice was easy and practiced. His name was Clifton Ayer, director of a company called Atlantic Corridor Partners. He described himself as assembling a consortium for a waterfront renewal project he called the Lunenburg Harbor Revitalization Initiative. He said he was interested in having Sinclair Development at the table. He would send the documents. The documents arrived in her email at 11 that night. She opened them at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. She read the first 3 pages and then she looked at the map. At the center of the proposed development area, marked in light blue for transition use rezoning, was Heartfelt Salvage. The full lot, 3.5 acres of coastal salvage yard, waterfront access included, designated as the anchor parcel of a $60 million mixed residential and commercial development. She did not call anyone. She put the kettle back on. She sat for 2 hours with the document spread across the table and a highlighter going dry in her hand. In the morning, she called her contact at the provincial registry office. I need every land transfer filed in Lunenburg and Shelburne counties in the last 24 months. Cross-reference Atlantic Corridor Partners and any company sharing its registered agent. A pause. Petra, that is not a casual request. I know, I need it. Give me until Friday. The files came Thursday evening by secure transfer. She spread the printouts across the kitchen table and worked until 1 in the morning with 2 different colored pens. Atlantic Corridor Partners had acquired 11 parcels on the Lunenburg waterfront through 3 numbered companies with registered addresses at the same accountant's office on Portland Street in Dartmouth. The acquisitions had begun 22 months ago. 10 of the 11 lots were assembled. The 11th, the one without which there was no continuous waterfront access, was Heartfelt Salvage. She drove to the yard the next morning. She did not bring coffee this time. She brought the map. She spread it on the hood of his truck the way she had laid the documents on her own kitchen table. Gil stood beside her and looked. He did not move. He took his time reading the parcel markings and the company names listed in the legend. Clifton Air has been trying to acquire this yard since 2021, he said. He just kept changing the name of the company he used. Why does he want this specific parcel? Gil was quiet for a moment. Old story. I'll tell it once, then I won't tell it again. He kept his eyes on the map. This yard is sitting on the only deep draft access point on this stretch of coast that isn't under federal jurisdiction. If someone controls this lot, they control small vessel access to a 20-kilometer corridor. That is worth a great deal to a shipping interest that does not want federal oversight. He did not say more. She did not ask. Fern came around the corner of the office with a piece of sandstone the size of her palm, flat and smooth with a fossil impression in it. She held it up to Petra without explanation. Petra took it and looked at the impression carefully. She handed it back. Fern kept walking. Gil watched his daughter hand something to this woman for the third time in 4 days. He said nothing. That afternoon, the driver from the government SUV came by with a foil-covered dish from his wife. He said it was rapai pie, the old Acadian kind, and it was for Dot. He left it on the office counter, said hello to Fern, and on his way out he caught Gil at the side of the shed. "Sir, there is something in a file I kept that you need to know about. It is still in my possession. When you are ready." Gil looked at him. "I told you to destroy that file, Arsenal." "I know, sir, I didn't. I never will." Arsenal got in his truck and backed out of the yard. Gil stood with his hand on the gate and watched the dust settle. He did not call after him. That night, Petra took the fossil piece of sandstone out of her coat pocket and set it on the table beside the map. She looked at both of them for a long time. She did not entirely know what she was doing. She knew only that she had started. Outside, the fog was coming in off the bay. By morning, it would be sitting across the yard in layers. By morning, she would be back inside it. Sinclair Development and Heartfelt Salvage signed a memorandum of understanding 11 days after Petra had told Gil the liability profile of his yard was outside what her insurers would support. The document was 5 pages. The first 4 were standard. The 5th was a clause Petra had written herself on a Saturday morning in longhand before she typed it. In the event of any municipal rezoning application, expropriation proceeding, or variance action affecting the Heartfelt salvage parcel, Sinclair Development will provide legal representation and full procedural advocacy at no cost to the owner, without limit of duration, until the matter is withdrawn or fully resolved. Gil read the page twice. He set the pen down. Fern's name doesn't appear anywhere. Not in any trust, not in any filing, not in any press. It won't. He picked up the pen and signed. That weekend on a Saturday afternoon when the light over the bay had gone gold the way it does on the Atlantic coast in October just before the clouds come in, Fern asked Petra if she wanted to walk to the point. Gil stood by the truck at the pull-off and watched them go down the gravel path to the waterline. Petra had her jacket open. Fern had her boots on the wrong feet and had not noticed or had noticed and did not care. "Do you know what a moon snail does?" Fern asked. "I don't think I do."
"Drills into clams when
"It has a tongue like a file." She considered this. "Dad says everything on the shore has a job, does it?" He says, "The ones that look like they're not doing anything are the most important ones because they're holding the bottom together." Petra did not answer right away. They walked along the tide line until Fern stopped to pick up a bleached crab shell nearly intact. She held it up against the gray sky and turned it so Petra could see where the joints had separated cleanly. A long line of double-crested cormorants flew low across the channel, single file, their wings barely clearing the surface. Fern counted them. 11. At the pull-off, Gil stood with one hand on the bed rail and one in his pocket and watched. He did not move, his face did not change, but the line of his shoulders shifted, the way the shoulders of a man who has been holding them tight for a long time shift when something eases. He noticed that night after Fern was asleep and the dishes were done, step of the house, and looked out across the water at the lights on the far shore. A tugboat was somewhere on the bay. He could hear it, but not see it through the fog. He did not pray, he did not speak. He sat for a long time with his hands folded. At 10, Petra's phone rang. The number was Dot's landline. The voice, though, was Arsenal. "Miss Sinclair, if you want to understand why Clifton Air has been after this yard for 3 years, you need to read the file I kept. There's a 2020 engineering audit that was buried. It shows what that parcel is actually sitting on, and it explains why Air's Consortium cannot build without it and cannot admit why they need it. Meet me at the Red Cap Diner on King Street tomorrow at 7. Bring a bag. Don't tell Hartwell." She put the phone down. She poured a glass of water. She did not drink it. She looked at the sandstone fossil on the windowsill and thought about Gil at the truck on the point, watching his daughter walk along the tide line beside a woman who was not her mother and not yet anything else he had a word for. By morning, she would know what Clifton Air actually wanted, and she was beginning to understand that it was not the land. The red cap opened at 6:30. Arsenal was already in the corner booth with a paper cup and a folder on the table. He slid it across before she had taken off her coat. "Read it here. Don't photograph it." Inside the folder were two sections. The first was a copy of a coastal geological survey commissioned by Transport Canada in 2019, covering a stretch of the Lunenburg waterfront. The second was an internal engineering review titled Lunenburg Harbor Substrate Assessment, Confidential, not for distribution, dated November of 2020. The lead signatory was Lieutenant Commander Gilbert Hartwell, Royal Canadian Infrastructure Reserve, on secondment to Infrastructure Canada. She read the first page. She read the third. The assessment concluded that the substrate beneath the Hartwell parcel contained an undocumented deep bedrock channel running parallel to the coast. The channel provided the only stable foundation point in the corridor for a pier structure capable of handling vessels above a certain draft. Without access to that parcel, any commercial pier development on the surrounding lots would require prohibitively expensive deep pilings, or would be subject to load restrictions that made large vessel transit impossible. The report had been filed confidentially, classified at a low federal level, and had not been shared with the municipality. The lead engineer had been Gil Hartwell. She turned the page. In the summary, a note in small text at the bottom. L. Cedar Hartwell voluntarily recused himself from all subsequent commercial development advising related to this corridor. Reason given, conflict of interest arising from personal ownership of primary parcel. He had found the data. He had filed the report honestly, and he had stepped back entirely. Below the summary was a second document, a coroner's report, partial, an industrial accident at a salvage operation in Dartmouth in the winter of 2021. A woman, an engineer. Her name was Marguerite Hartwell. She had been on site as a safety consultant for a demolition project using substandard shoring equipment supplied by a company that had 3 months later been awarded a contract with Atlantic Corridor Partners. The company was a subsidiary of an earlier version of Clifton Air's consortium. She set the folder down. Her hand did not shake. Something behind her sternum did. Arsenal watched her. "He did the geological work, ma'am. He reported accurately. He recused himself. And then Ares people needed what he knew and couldn't get to it because the file was classified and the man who held the knowledge wouldn't sell it." He paused. "The equipment that failed in Dartmouth was on a project Ares consortium had recommended. The shoring specs were under what the site required. Marguerite Hartwell knew it. She had flagged it in writing. She went to site that morning because she wanted to see it corrected in person." Petra drove to the yard with the folder on the passenger seat. Gil was behind the office checking a cable spool. She walked around the corner and held the folder out. He looked at it. He took it. He opened the first page. He set it on the workbench without reading further. "I know what's in it. You wrote half of it, yes." She did not let the silence go on too long. "Why didn't you fight to have the subcitrate report published?" He looked at the far fence. Marguerite was not going to come back either way. Fern was 5. She needed a father who came home, not a man tied up in proceedings for 3 years. He paused. "I gave the data to the people who needed it. I told them what the ground was worth, and I walked away from the money that came with knowing it." Petra spoke before she had fully decided to. "There is a public hearing on the rezoning application in 9 days. The municipality doesn't know about the substrate report. ARE does. You're the only person who can put the two together in a room and make it matter." He looked at her. "I know," she said. "I'm asking you to fight." He said nothing. He picked up the folder, walked into the office, and set it in the bottom drawer of his desk. She called her contact at the municipal clerk's office on the way to her car. "I need to register a delegation for the October council session, Sinclair Development. And I need everything ARA filed in the last 24 months on the Lunenburg waterfront in front of me by Monday." The Lunenburg Council chamber on the night of October the 22nd was full. The Lunenburg Progress had a reporter in the second row. A camera crew from CBC Nova Scotia had set up near the side door. Dot sat in the third row in a dark wool coat with a button from a campaign she had won 30 years ago pinned to the lapel. though she would not say which campaign. Gil Hartwell wore a dark green collared shirt and dark trousers. No uniform, no citations. He sat in the second row beside Petra Sinclair. Clifton Era had recused himself from the council vote 6 weeks earlier. He spoke now as a private citizen. He described aging industrial properties. He described public access to the waterfront. He described a development that would, he said, return the harbor to the people of Lunenburg. He did not look at Gil when he said return. Petra Sinclair rose when he sat down. She introduced herself as principal of Sinclair Development, current infrastructure partner with Infrastructure Canada's Eastern Coastal Program. She spoke without notes. She made 3 points. First, Hartwell Salvage held an active Transport Canada coastal salvage certification and a federal demolition engineering license covering coastal structures. There were 6 such operations in Atlantic Canada. Hartwell's was the only one within 60 kilometers of the Lunenburg corridor. The parcel was not a liability. It was a federally certified operational asset. Second, she held up a 1-page summary. Atlantic Corridor Partners had assembled 10 contiguous parcels on the Lunenburg waterfront, through 3 numbered companies sharing a single registered agent at a Portland Street address in Dartmouth. The purchase pattern, the corporate structure, and the rezoning timeline raised a question about whether council had received full disclosure on the commercial interests behind the application. Third, she moved to table the vote pending an independent review. A ripple went through the room. Clifton Eyre leaned into the microphone. His voice was reasonable. He had worked on it for many years. Miss Sinclair appears to be acting as an advocate for a salvage operator. The chamber might wonder why. A beat of silence. In the back corner, a man in a dark coat stood. He did not approach the microphone. He simply rose and stood with his hands at his sides. The CBC reporter in the front row turned, recognized him and wrote one line in his notepad. Colonel Armand Desjardins, retired former Director of Coastal Infrastructure Security, Infrastructure Canada. In the third row, did not stand. She did not have to. Clifton Eyre shifted his papers. Gil Hartwell stood up. He did not go to the microphone immediately. When he spoke from where he stood with both hands resting on the back of the bench in front of him. In 2020, I completed a geological assessment of this waterfront corridor under a federal contract. The assessment identified a structural feature beneath this parcel that has significant bearing on any development application for the surrounding lots. That report was classified at a low federal level. I am asking tonight that it be disclosed to council before any vote is taken. He paused. I am also asking council to examine the shoring specifications on a Dartmouth demolition project awarded to a subsidiary of Atlantic Corridor Partners in the fall of 2021. A safety engineer flagged those specifications in writing before the project began. The shoring failed in February of that year. He looked toward Clifton Era, not with anger, with the flat steadiness of a man who has had 3 years to decide what he would say if he ever stood in a room like this one. My wife filed the written warning. She was on site the morning it failed because she believed that someone had to be there to see it corrected. She believed that the next crew deserved better than what she had been given. He looked down at his hands. Fern still has a piece of sea glass on her nightstand because her mother told her the ocean gives back what it loves. The ocean should have given Marguerite back. It should have brought her home. The room was very still. Council voted to table the rezoning application pending an independent substrate review and a referral to the Provincial Ethics Commissioner. The Lunenburg Progress ran the numbered company diagram above the fold the following Thursday. By the Tuesday after, Clifton Eyre had withdrawn his name from the Atlantic Corridor Partners Partnership Registry. The statement cited personal reasons. The next morning the yard was heavy with October fog. Petra drove out at 6:40 and parked behind Gil's truck. She did not know exactly what she had come for. She came anyway. He was in the office making coffee on the small camp stove. He poured 2 mugs without asking and held one out. She took it. They stood at the window and did not speak for a long moment. Outside, Fern came down the gravel path from the gate with both hands full. She pushed the office door open with her shoulder and walked straight to Petra and opened her palms. A gull feather, white and clean, and underneath it the flat piece of sandstone with the fossil impression that she had handed Petra 2 weeks before, which Petra had handed back. I thought you should keep it, Fern said. Mama found it on the point. She said fossils are just things that stayed. The room went still. Dot in the corner chair went very quiet. Gil was at the camp stove with the coffee pot in his hand. He did not look at Fern. He looked at the floor. The line of his shoulders moved the way it had moved. On the point, in October, the slow drop of something that had been held up for a long time. It was the first time in 2 years that Fern had said mama in a room where other people could hear it. Petra closed her hand around the stone. She put it in the inside pocket of her coat. She did not put it anywhere else. That afternoon, Colonel Desjardins called Gil's phone from his personal number. Captain Hartwell, I'm calling to offer you a civilian advisory role with the Federal Coastal Infrastructure Review Panel. You would not be consulting for any private interest. You would bring what you know to an assessment process that has been missing it. Gil listened. I'm also calling to tell you something else, Desjardins said. I was the officer who recommended the classification of the 2020 substrate report. I told myself it was protecting an active federal program from commercial interference. I was protecting a decision I had made about jurisdictional boundaries that turned out to be wrong. I owe you the chance to have that report made public, and I owe you a position that lets you do the work you were always doing. Gil was quiet for a moment. I'll think about it, he said. Not for the panel, for Arsenault. He kept a file I told him to let go of. Understood, Captain. That week, Dot was taken to South Shore Regional by ambulance. Her lungs. The doctor used careful language. He said a few weeks, possibly less. Petra came to the hospital the first evening and sat in the chair beside Dot's bed for 2 hours with a thermos of fish chowder from the diner on Montague Street that Dot had liked when she was well enough to go out. Dot took 3 spoonfuls and set it down. In a thin voice, she said that Petra's father had done business on the Lunenburg waterfront in the 80s, when Dot had been on the cannery floor and the whole harbor had smelled of saltfish and diesel, and everything had been louder and less pretty and more itself. She said the world had a way of sending the same people back to the same shore in different weather if you were patient enough to watch for it. Gil watched Petra sit, and he said nothing. Gil Hartwell accepted the advisory role with the Federal Coastal Infrastructure Review Panel on the 15th of November. He kept the yard. He drove to Halifax 1 day a week. The rest of the week he was in coveralls. Sinclair Development and Hartwell Salvage signed their full operational partnership for the coastal infrastructure assessment the same day. The contract was 28 pages. The 29th was a page Petra had written in pencil first. The Marguerite Hartwell Coastal Safety Foundation. 4% of net annual revenue from all joint project billings, in perpetuity, to be directed equally between an education fund held in trust for Fern Hartwell and annual bursaries for 3 engineering students at Dalhousie University whose research concerns coastal safety standards. The foundation documents carried Marguerite's full name for the first time in any legal filing in 3 years. Gil read the page. He set the pen down. He did not pick it up for nearly a minute. She would have written this part herself, he said. He signed. Dot passed away at South Shore Regional on a Thursday morning quietly, the kind of dying that has had enough time to arrange itself. The service was held at St. John's on Townsend Street. The church was small and full. Arsenault and his wife were in the 4th pew. Desjardins came and sat at the back. Liam Sinclair drove down from Halifax and stood beside his sister. After the burial in the parking lot off Townsend, Liam walked over to Gil and held out his hand. They shook for a long moment. Captain. Gil looked at him. Thank you, Liam said, for the bridge, for all of it. Gil nodded once. It was enough. Dot's will was a single page. She left the house on the inlet, the one she had rented to Gil and Fern at a price she called reasonable and others called generosity. Directly to Gil Hartwell, she left him the kitchen table, the cast iron pot she had made the chowder in, and the photograph on the wall of the cannery crew in 1987, everyone in rubber aprons and gumboots, Dot in the center, 26 years old, grinning. On the Friday of the following week, Arsenault's family came for dinner at the house on the inlet. His wife brought blueberry buckle from a recipe she said was her grandmother's. Their daughter brought a deck of cards and a small knitted whale. Fern fell asleep on the sofa after dessert with the gull feather in her fist and the knitted whale under her chin. Arsenault carried his daughter out to the truck. His wife held Petra at the door for a moment longer than a stranger would and did not explain why. Petra stayed to wash dishes. Gil dried them. The water ran. The light above the sink hummed the low hum of an old kitchen. She washed a bowl, he dried it and set it on the rack. She washed another. They moved through the stack in a rhythm that neither of them had learned and neither of them had to think about. When the last bowl was done, she took the fossil sandstone from her coat pocket and set it on the windowsill above the sink. It was not a declaration, it was a kitchen, and in it, for the first time in a long time, the only sound was the kind that means everything is where it belongs. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday in late November when the spruce trees on the point had gone dark, with coming snow and the light over the bay was the low silver of a coast turning toward winter, Petra drove to Heartfelt Salvage in a wool sweater and flat boots. She parked beside his truck and walked through the gate without calling ahead. She did not need to anymore. Gil was at the dock at the back of the yard where the gravel gave way to planking over the water. He had a length of old rope in his hands. Fern stood at his hip in her wool hat, watching. He was teaching her how to tie a bowline. "Rabbit comes out of the hole," he said. "Around the tree, back down the hole." Fern tried it. She got it wrong on the first attempt. He showed her again without commentary. She got it on the second try. She held it up with both hands, and her face was the face of someone who has been paying very close attention and has finally been proved right to do so. "There you go." He let her try it a third time. She did it faster. He untied it and handed it back without a word. She tied it a fourth time, each loop a little cleaner and closer than the last. He looked up then and saw Petra at the edge of the planking. He did not say anything. He held out his hand. She walked over. The three of them went out to the end of the dock. Low tide, the bay, going silver and quiet. Fern ran ahead to look for things in the mud. The water made the small, slow sound that Mahone Bay makes in November when the season has settled into itself and stopped announcing anything. Gil stood beside Petra. He did not look at her. He looked across the water. "You told me my yard was a liability." She looked at the water. "You came back anyway." He let the silence sit. It was the kind of silence that had room in it for more than one thing at once. After a while, he reached out and rested the back of his hand against the back of hers. Just that, the lightest contact, the smallest of things. Down at the mud line, Fern held up a whelk shell the size of her forearm and shouted something into the cold air that neither of them quite caught. In an office in Halifax, that same afternoon, a clerk from Infrastructure Canada delivered a sealed envelope to the Deputy Minister's outer office. Inside was a single photograph printed on plain paper. Gil Heartfelt, Fern Heartfelt, and Petra Sinclair at the end of a wooden dock in November, the bay behind them, going silver in the low light. Colonel Desjardins took the photograph into his office and looked at it for a long moment. He set it on the corner of his desk beside an older photograph from 2017, a small citation ceremony at a Transport Canada office. A man in field clothes, shaking hands with a deputy minister, not smiling, already turning back toward whatever he had to do next. He looked at the two photographs together. He did not say anything. He bowed his head one small movement and went back to work. He had gone back to his salvage yard. She had been the one who decided to come with him. And for the first time since the bay took Marguerite, the silence on the water was not empty.